Before we start looking at Resistance 2, I need to make a quick correction about my Resistance 1 video. I incorrectly stated that the game ran at 60 frames per second, when in fact, it actually only runs at 30. I mistakenly assumed it did because I saw my capture software was, well, capturing it at 60 FPS, and I simply wasn't paying close enough attention to the game itself. So, big thanks to Eric's in the comments section for pointing this one out to me, because I probably would have just gone on assuming that the game ran at 60 FPS because I'm dumb like that. But anyway, on to Resistance 2. So, the PS3's launch library was a bit of a disaster. I went over that a little already in the beginning of my Resistance Fall of Man video, but the first-person shooter developed by PlayStation darlings Insomniac Games was seen by many as the one saving grace of the PS3's disappointing launch library. Coming as no surprise, it was the first PS3 launch game to sell over 1 million copies. Who could have seen that one coming? And you know what? Rightfully so. It was a rock-solid, fundamentally sound, if a bit rudimentary, shooter that offers an intense challenge. By which I mean, that game is hard as balls. And also, probably coming as no surprise, it was followed by a direct sequel in November 2008. Appropriately titled, Resistance 2! Picking up immediately where the first game left off, we join our protagonist, United States 1st Ranger Division Sergeant Nathan Hale, yes, got it right this time, following the climax of the previous game. In fact, this guy is so much of a Chad Thundercock that out of all 12,000 soldiers from the 1st Infantry Unit sent to Britain, he is the only survivor of the events of the previous game. Right before the end credits of the previous game roll, we see him being picked up by Black Ops paratroopers, and this is where we see the sequel pick up. After a forced sedative and a quick introduction to Commanding Officer Troy Baker, we get shot down in Iceland where our commanding headquarters is at, by the Chimera, the antagonistic alien force. And it's here we get introduced to the general gameplay mechanics. It's here in the Iceland base that the main plot kicks off. The Chimera are attacking the base in order to free a captured Chimeran leader known as Daedalus, who is accidentally freed and escapes. It's implied that Daedalus is psychically linked to the Chimera, so him escaping is a very, very bad thing. The game then picks up 2 years later. Sergeant Hale, who now has way more speaking lines this time around, has been promoted to lieutenant, and he is revealed to have been a member of Project Abraham, a sort of human guinea pig to test a possible resistance against infection of the Chimera virus. So he should absolutely not miss any inhibitor treatments. That would be a tragedy. The Chimera then launch a full assault on the United States, attacking both east and west coasts. The protagonists have more or less been caught with their pants down, so it's from here you're desperately fighting back the invasion any way you can. From crashing a Chimeran attack ship, to shutting down their network of operation towers, all with the ultimate goal of finding and eliminating Daedalus. So, no pressure, right? And let me just say that in this chapter in San Francisco after the 2-year time skip, it's here you get a good look at the Chimeran forces blacking out the sky with their attack ships. You really get this enormous sense of dread from this sight, like you really are fighting a hopeless battle for the fate of the world. Which I guess is a good segue to talk about this game's aesthetics. The first game was, all things considered, a pretty good-looking PS3 launch game. It probably could have used a little bit more visual variety in its stages, but it's definitely not a bad-looking game for 2006. This time around, though, since you're hopping all around the US, this allows the game to take on much more visual variety, and as a result, you get treated to some real incredible-looking stages. My favorite is definitely the neighborhood in Idaho where you're running through houses and into yards fighting these weird hatchling chimera. This area was a definite standout for me. Now, granted, you will still be going through the usual military bunkers and metallic gray alien spaceships occasionally, but when the game does treat you to a nice forest or city streets, it really makes those areas stand out. Maybe it's the fact that I'm American, but I found the setting this time around to be much more appealing, personally. We also get more creative designs for the Chimera, too. Many of the ones seen in the first game do make a return, but we also get treated to some less humanoid-looking ones that I think look just plain awesome. I won't lie, some of these Chimera designs wouldn't look out of place in a Ratchet & Clank game. Gee, I wonder why. The production values of the game are also much higher than the last time as well. There's even a couple of really cool set-piece moments that the first game didn't quite have, like this one against the giant Chimera tearing up a city. When you fight this thing, you get to shoot missiles into its mouth, but make sure you have enough, or else you're gonna get vored. And while the graphics are quite a bit more detailed than last time, as you might expect, this does unfortunately come with a bit of a price. The game is a little bit more prone to occasional dips in frame rate when there's a lot going on screen. While it doesn't happen super often, I did see that the game would very occasionally dip below 30 frames per second, where the first game had no problem maintaining it consistently. Again, I didn't notice it happening super often, but I felt like it was worth mentioning. Though I did notice that the visuals in this game are a smidge blurrier than in Resistance 1. That game's graphics are really sharp, but this game kind of looks like someone smeared Vaseline all over the lens. I think in order to have this game's textures look more detailed, they had to implement a lot of bloom or something to make the game run more consistently at 30 FPS. That's the only thing I can think of. If you've played the first game, or hell, any other first-person shooter ever, then you already know what kind of gameplay to expect here. Running, jumping occasionally, hiding behind cover, the usual first-person shooter fare. But the game has adopted two new mechanics, or should I say replacements, over the original game. For starters, you now have regenerating health. So do you remember from the first game where Hale gets infected by Chimera? Well, that actually comes up in the story. Hale needs to take inhibitor shots to keep the Chimera virus within him at bay, and this presents itself through the gameplay as regenerating health. And I know regenerating health is one of those things you either love or you hate, especially around the time that this game came out. But for me personally, I found it super handy to just duck out of the action for a few seconds to get all my health back, then be at the mercy of the game and whenever it decided to throw healing items at me, because of how annoying and aggravating it was in the first game. Even worse when you couldn't even take those healing items with you and use them whenever you want. You have to use them right then and there. So for me personally, I didn't mind the change to a regenerating health system. If I'm being honest, I never really minded it in other games, but that's just me. Though one thing I'm not quite as thrilled about is the other replacement that Resistance 2 introduces. The dreaded two-weapon loadout. Because why have backup weapons when you're running low on ammo, right? The game does try to alleviate that by having enemies use the same kind of guns, so you'll always have ammo on hand, but there have been some cases where I ran clean out of ammo for both of my guns, so I had no choice but to commit suicide by Chimera and respawn. You only get 2 or 3 full clips of ammo at a time before you either have to find more ammo or switch to a new weapon. It's not a game killer. I can adapt to a game being limited to a 2-weapon loadout, but beware that this game does do that after the first game allows you to have your full arsenal at all times. As for the weapons, many of the same ones from the first game return here, like the carbine, the bullseye with its homing bullets, and the auger which can shoot through walls and other solid matter. In addition, we have a few new ones like the marksman, which is a kind of rifle that can be fired from short distances but also be used as a sniper rifle. It's one of my favorites in the game. I also really love the Wraith, a mini turret gun that just rips through enemies like wet tissue paper. This is extremely satisfying to use. We also get an actual pistol this time. Granted, it's technically a Magnum, but still. The first game just didn't have anything like this. This is also really satisfying to use, and the sound design for it is just punchy and powerful. I mean, seriously, listen to this. Oh, and how could I forget the spinning disc blade launcher? It's literally a Ratchet and Clank weapon, but good God is it fun to use.
Oh gosh, somebody please tell me, why is this so satisfying?
I would have liked to have seen this game get a little bit more creative with the weapons like the first game did. Aside from the spinning blade launcher, we don't really get any weapons aside from the ones from the first game that are really out there conceptually. That's not to say that the ones here aren't fun to use, but we don't see quite as much of that Insomniac weapon creativity as we did last time. But they are still functional, so I guess I can let it slide. Though one of the things they changed with the bullseye weapon is that when you tag an enemy to fire your homing bullets at, in the first game you would see a light on the gun itself telling you that an enemy's been tagged, providing you with a visual implicator that you're tagging an enemy, and allowing you to make your split-second decisions if you were in the middle of a gunfight. This time around, the enemy itself will glow a very faint yellowish glow if they've been tagged, but I found that because they blend in a little too much with the background, that it's easier to lose track of them. I just found it easier to know that if I shot my tag at an enemy and saw the light on my gun, that I was tracking them and didn't have to worry about if I missed or not. It's kinda hard to explain if you're not playing the game yourself, but when bullets start flying, that minuscule level of comfort knowing that my homing bullets are gonna hit their designated target helps out tremendously. I could be wrong, but the tag also doesn't seem like it lasts as long as it did in the first game. So if the shooting feels satisfying, does that mean the game as a whole is enjoyable? Well, let's touch on that. I hesitate to call this a complaint, but one of the comments I made about Fall of Man is that for as good as the shooting was in that game, on just the normal difficulty setting, the game is astonishingly hard. The enemy AI in that game is smart as hell and incredibly aggressive. And getting killed in that game will make you have to redo anywhere between 5 and 10 solid minutes of gameplay. It could get frustrating dying in the same area over and over again, and having to redo the same portions of a level over and over again because of it.
Fuck this shit! We came in this fucking room and everything went fucking bad. Fuck this shit, man.
What Resistance 2 does to alleviate some of that frustration is that the checkpoint system is a lot more forgiving compared to the first game. Granted, this game does still have the occasional frustrating moment, like these invisible monster enemies that come out of nowhere and can kill you in one hit if you don't hear them coming. This is still a game where you'll more often than not have to plan your actions one step ahead, but I didn't find this game to be nearly as crushing and demoralizing as the first one could get at times. There's probably some of you out there that have played Resistance 1 on the highest difficulty setting and can do it without getting hit once, to which I say, you're simply a much better gamer than I am if you can do that. My hat's off to you. While each of the game's 7 chapters vary in length, some of the later ones can take anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour to clear. And in Chapter 5 there's this huge gunfight on a bridge, and just going from there to one of the hollowed out buildings took me a good 45 minutes before I even got to the pathway to get to the boss fight. So I would recommend taking a break when you get here. Don't do what I did and play it in one go, you'll probably burn yourself out. I know it sounds weird and maybe a little unhealthy for a video game to make you exhausted, but I was getting mentally drained marathoning this particular section. But your mileage may vary.
If only we could fly!
I guess I should probably mention that this game had multiplayer, shouldn't I? Up till now, this review has been solely about the single-player campaign, and this will be the only time I mention multiplayer in this particular series retrospective. But I wanted to quickly mention that Resistance 2 specifically had online multiplayer modes capable of hosting a staggering 60 players, which apparently was the highest amount of possible players in an online mode for a PlayStation exclusive at the time. Now granted, the servers for all 3 mainline PS3 titles have been shut down since 2014, but from what I've been reading, it looks like it could have been a blast to play, what with its leveling system and the different characters you could play as. Maybe if Insomniac wanted to revive this series as, like, a free-to-play multiplayer game, that'd be pretty cool. If you're just looking at the series from a multiplayer perspective, I think it still has viability today. Just my 2 cents. Altogether, Resistance 2 took me maybe just under 10 hours to complete on the normal difficulty. So maybe just a hair shorter than the first game, but if it is shorter, it's only because I didn't die and had to redo big sections of levels nearly as much. And I gotta say, this is a classic case of a sequel done right. Not only does it take the frenetic, fast-paced shooting of the original, as well as many of the same weapons that were already fun to use, it gives you more of them that are also fun to use, as well as more memorable set pieces, much more variety in the levels, and all while giving you a much more fair challenge compared to the original, without it feeling handholdy. It's funny how all a game had to do was pepper in a couple of extra checkpoints here and there to make a game not feel so frustrating. That's not to say that this game will go easy on you, definitely not, but you'll more than likely be nowhere near as frustrated as you might have been playing the first one. I gotta admit, I came out of Resistance 2 with a much more positive attitude than I did with Fall of Man. Leave it to Insomniac Games to craft a sequel that's much more improved over the original in just about every way. Even without the online multiplayer, overall, this is still a game worth checking out. Complete in-box copies of the game are still dirt cheap on eBay, so if you still have a working PS3 lying around and you haven't checked this game out for yourself yet, I'd say it's worth your time and investment. And with that, we have one more game in the mainline PS3 trilogy to look at. We'll find out soon enough exactly how this series reaches its dramatic conclusion. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, I have a review of Resistance Fall of Man you can check out right here. If you'd like to support the channel, then please consider subscribing and sharing this video wherever you can. If you want to support the channel in a more direct way, I have a link to my Cash app in the description below. Contribute whatever you'd like, and you'll get a free verbal shoutout at the beginning of my next video. Thanks again for checking out this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.